everyone. I hope that you're all doing well during this first week of Unit 2 in our New Mexico history class. I just finished reading through all of the What is History discussions, and so I wanted to check in with you about that. Also, just to comment one more time, if you have not yet gotten on Twitter or Hypothesis, or if you've gotten on Twitter or Hypothesis but haven't posted yet, you can still do that for both Unit 1 and Unit 2. If you need help with either of those, please let me know as soon as you can, and I'll be happy to help out. So again, let me know if you need help getting on either of those. Also, if you have strong feelings this far in, you might wait a little while too to see which one you like better, but if you have strong feelings about which one you prefer to the other, whether you like Twitter better or Hypothesis better, especially if you've tried both, I'd love to hear about that. Again, you might not have strong feelings yet, but later in the term, I would love to hear some feedback about which platform you like best and why, so that I can fine-tune the reading annotations assignment as I continue teaching the class. So again, yeah, thanks for any feedback you can give me. All right, so thinking about history, one of the things I do like to emphasize as we think about how we study the past, and I loved reading your definitions, thinking about what constitutes history, what we need to do in order to understand the past and how it relates to us in the present, as well as the future. I think that those are important ways to think about why history is valuable. It's something that can teach us empathy. It's something that can help us see multiple sides of a situation. And it can help us recognize that there's never one side to a story. There aren't even two sides to every story. There are usually many sides, especially when we're talking about large-scale events that impact entire communities, entire states, entire nations, and beyond. There are always going to be many different perspectives on those things. The difficulty that historians face is finding all of those perspectives, locating those in order to answer questions about the past. And so as we go forward then, I'm pausing here to talk about the notion of questions. I think it's important for us to consider the reasons that it may be easier to ask, or excuse me, easier to answer questions than to ask good questions about the past. So again, we've got to think about how do the questions that we ask of the past shape the ways that we think about it, shape the kinds of answers that we'll get. And can the questions that we ask actually limit our viewpoints? The answer is yes. And so we need to think about how and why that is the case. This will be particularly important as you come up with topics and questions for the final project. And those aren't due for a few weeks, but again, keep in mind as you're coming up with a topic that you might be interested in researching, what are the questions you want to ask about it? And how will those questions shape the sources you'll locate and think through? Of course, I give you some source requirements for the assignment, but the questions will shape the kinds of things you look for. So that's not necessarily wrong or a problem, but it's something to be aware of, as is the notion of bias. I think that many of us use the term bias as sort of a negative, and you can respond and correct me if I'm wrong about that, if you think I'm wrong about that. But it often seems to me that when we talk in those terms, say that source is biased, we're saying it's bad. We're saying that it is something that isn't as valuable or valid for our research. And that can be true, I think, in certain contexts. But for the context of history, historical evidence is incomplete, and it's comprised of documents, stories, letters, journal entries, newspaper reports, all and many, many other things, of course, but all things that were created by human beings who had a certain perspective on the events that they're describing, who had certain purposes in writing what they wrote. And so those purposes, the reasons for writing primary sources, the things that are closest to the time frame of the event, mean that primary sources actually tend to be more biased than secondary sources. That's not always true. But the best secondary sources, if we're looking for valid, academic, peer-reviewed secondary sources, those will, if not try to be objective, because as we know, objective history isn't possible for some of the reasons that I was just mentioning. As researchers, we bring our own worldviews and beliefs to the table, and sometimes we limit our perspectives even by the questions we're asking. So um, again, secondary sources, though, strive to bring together a set of different documents and perspectives on the past that will help us to get that bigger picture. So even though there may be some bias there, it's probably not quite as explicit or direct as the biases we'll find in primary sources. So the problem I've just laid out there then is, how do we deal with that? The evidence that we have for history is always biased in some way, even if we're just talking about it's biased to a certain perspective. Usually it's more than that. Usually it's biased by purpose, and it's biased by argument and those kinds of things. So how do we deal with that as we look into the past? What are your thoughts on understanding documents that present us with conflicting views, on understanding the biases they present us, and what lessons we should draw from that in terms of putting together narratives about the past? If you're willing to, please respond to that question. I'll post this video in the For Fun discussion forum as well. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on the issues that I've presented in the video. So again, I'll put it there so there's a space for you to respond, since you can't respond here in the announcements. If you have any questions about any of the topics we're studying, or the ideas we've been working through, as well as technical things, please don't hesitate to let me know. And I'm looking forward to continuing our work together.